It was just after midnight on the 6th of June, 1944. The air in the Wolf's Lair, Adolf Hitler's fortified command center deep in the forests of East Prussia, was thick with cigar smoke and rising panic. An aide, his face pale and beaded with sweat, stood frozen, debating the unthinkable. Should he wake the Führer? The teletype machines chattered relentlessly, spitting out frantic reports from the Normandy coast, paratroopers dropping from the sky like rain, a naval armada of over 5,000 ships, a steel forest on the horizon, an invasion. But the generals hesitated. Colonel General Alfred Jodl, chief of operations, held a decrypted message in his trembling hand. It was from their most trusted agent inside Britain, a man codenamed Garbo. For weeks, Garbo's reports had been painting a crystal-clear picture. Any landing at Normandy, he insisted, would be a large-scale feint, a diversionary sacrifice designed to lure their elite panzer divisions away from the real prize, the Pas de Calais. Garbo, their star operative whose intelligence had proven uncannily accurate, had been unequivocal. The main assault, led by the Allies' best general, George S. Patton, was yet to come. His network of 27 agents, spread across the British Isles from Glasgow to Dover, all confirmed it. To move the panzers now would be to fall into the Allies' trap. Hours later, as thousands of American, British, and Canadian soldiers bled on the sands of Omaha, Utah, and Gold Beaches, Hitler finally awoke. He listened to the chaotic reports of the Normandy landings. Then, with a chilling calmness, he made the single most critical decision of the day. Garbo was right. This was a trick. The 7th and 15th Armies, including the powerful panzer division stationed near Calais, would not be released to counterattack Normandy. They would wait for the real invasion. At that very moment, in a small, heavily guarded house in London, a slight, balding Spanish man named Juan Pujol Garcia sat before a wireless transmitter. Listening to the coded German radio signals, he heard the initial panic, the confusion, and then the fatal acceptance of his lie. They believed him. They believed in his army of ghosts. At that moment, this unassuming man, a former chicken farmer and failed hotel manager with an almost pathological hatred for extremism, knew he was holding the fate of the free world in his hands. He had told the greatest, most elaborate lie in history, and the Führer had bought it completely. The question was, how did a man with no training, no connections, and no combat experience become the most important spy of the Second World War? The story begins not in the halls of power, but in a small, struggling hotel in Madrid in 1940. The world was aflame. France had fallen under the Nazi jackboot. Britain stood alone, a final bastion against a tide of fascism that had already consumed a continent. And Juan Pujol Garcia, a 30-year-old hotel manager with a fervent imagination and a string of failed businesses trailing behind him, felt a profound and suffocating sense of helplessness. He had seen the horrors of civil war in his native Spain, an experience that had forged in him a deep and abiding hatred for all forms of political extremism. Drafted into the cavalry on the Republican side, he found their rigid communist ideology suffocating and deserted. Captured by Franco's nationalists, he was forced to fight for a fascist cause he despised even more. He served by doing as little as possible, earning a reputation as a bumbling but harmless soldier. His war was not one of combat, but of survival, a masterclass in feigning incompetence to avoid contributing to a conflict he saw as morally bankrupt. He had witnessed firsthand how both the far left and the far right crushed the individual in the name of the state. For him, the new war engulfing Europe was not a battle between nations, but a final, desperate struggle for the soul of humanity, and he could not bear to be a spectator. He decided he must do something, anything, for the good of humanity. His contribution, he concluded with a strange and unwavering certainty, would be to become a spy for Britain. His first attempts were almost comically disastrous. With no introduction and no credentials, he walked into the imposing British embassy in Madrid. He secured a meeting with a naval attaché, to whom he delivered a passionate, rambling, and almost incoherent offer of his services. He spoke of his love for freedom and his desire to fight the Nazis. The attaché, accustomed to dealing with cranks and opportunists in the spy-infested city, saw only a slightly manic Spaniard with a history of managing a failing poultry farm, no military or intelligence experience, and an almost childlike earnestness. He was politely but firmly shown the door. Undeterred, Pujol tried again, and again. On his fourth attempt, he was met by a stern MI6 officer who, tired of his persistence, told him bluntly that the British services had no interest in an amateur, however well-intentioned. The door was closed. Lesser men would have abandoned the idea, returning to a life of quiet obscurity. But Pujol's mind worked on a different plane of logic. He sat in a Madrid cafe, mulling over his rejection. The British didn't want him, fine, but the Germans needed spies in Britain. His thinking arrived at a stunningly illogical and brilliant conclusion. If the British wouldn't hire him to spy on the Germans, he would get the Germans to hire him to spy for them. Once he was a German agent, he could then approach the British again, not as an unknown amateur, but as a priceless, ready-made double agent, a gift they simply couldn't refuse. It was a plan of breathtaking audacity, born of equal parts desperation and an almost delusional self-confidence. With a newfound sense of purpose, he reinvented himself. He began frequenting Madrid's pro-German social circles, loudly proclaiming his fervent support for Franco and his admiration for the Third Reich. He manufactured a story about being a government official with a diplomatic passport that would allow him to travel to London. Through a contact, he was introduced to a German intelligence officer from the Abwehr, Madrid's station chief. Pujol sold his new persona perfectly, presenting himself as a fanatical fascist, eager to do his part for the new European order. The German officer, desperate for any assets who could get inside Britain, was intrigued. The Abwehr's network in the UK was practically non-existent, a fact they were keen to hide from Berlin. After a few meetings, they decided to take a chance on the enthusiastic Spaniard. They gave him a crash course in the fundamentals of espionage, how to write in invisible ink, how to create a basic code, and how to observe military movements. They handed him a bottle of invisible ink, a code book, a few $1,000s for expenses, and a new identity. He was now their agent. Code name, Arabelle. His mission was simple: go to London, establish a new life, and begin building a network of spies. There was only one problem with his mission to infiltrate London. Pujol had no way of getting to Britain. He had no diplomatic passport, no visa, and spoke not a single word of English. Trapped by his own lie, he did the next logical thing a man of his unique talents would do. He moved to Lisbon, Portugal, checked into a modest apartment, and began to pretend he was in London. For the next year, his entire operation would become a masterpiece of pure, unadulterated fiction, a world spun from the most mundane of sources, all while battling a far more intimate and unpredictable enemy at home. His primary tools were not secret gadgets, but a tourist guide to Britain, a blue guide, a map of the country, and some reference books on the Royal Navy he found in a local library. Seated at a small table in his Lisbon apartment, the sounds of Portugal drifting in through the window, he would meticulously craft his dispatches from an imaginary London. His reports to his German handler in Madrid, a man named Federico Naperati, were a marvel of imaginative detail. He described his fictional journey to England, inventing security checks he never faced and conversations he never had. He began to breathe life into his network of sub-agents. There was a KLM pilot who gave him information on RAF flight patterns, a disgruntled Venezuelan student in Glasgow, ripe for recruitment, a Swiss banker in the Foreign Office, and most colorfully, a fanatical Welsh nationalist in Swansea, leader of a fictional group called the Brothers of the Aryan World Order. He created them all from thin air, giving each a personality, a code name, a motivation, and even petty jealousies that made them seem all too human. He wrote his reports in Spanish, then took them to a local student to be translated into formal Portuguese, before meticulously coding them and sending them off. His expense reports were a work of art in themselves. He would invent missions for his fictional agents. A trip to a naval base in Dover, a clandestine meeting in a London pub, and then bill the Germans for their travel, food, and lodging costs, all of which he pocketed. This entire charade was conducted under the constant, nerve-shredding threat of his own wife, Araceli. While Pujol was driven by a grand ideological mission, Araceli was driven by a desire for a normal life. She had followed him to Lisbon, but she was miserable. She missed her family in Spain. She hated the food, and she was terrified by her husband's bizarre new profession. She saw him as a foolish man playing a dangerous game that would get them both killed. Their apartment became a pressure cooker of domestic strife and existential dread. She would fly into rages, accusing him of madness, threatening to go to the Spanish embassy and expose his entire operation. Pujol lived in a state of constant terror, not of the Gestapo or MI5, but of his wife's next outburst. He would spend his days inventing lies to fool the Third Reich, and his nights inventing new lies to placate Araceli, promising her a glamorous life in London that he knew was a complete fantasy. His lack of real knowledge about Britain sometimes led to comical, almost disastrous errors. In one report, he wrote that in Glasgow there were men who would do anything for a liter of wine, a statement that would have been absurd to any actual Briton, as wine was not the common drink in working-class Glasgow, and the liter was not a standard measure. But the Germans, so eager to believe they had a master spy in London and so ignorant of British culture themselves, never questioned it. His reports were so filled with the texture of everyday life, the price of a train ticket, the mood in a pub, all gleaned from his tourist guide, that they seemed utterly convincing. They praised his resourcefulness and urged him to expand his network. He had become their most trusted source on Allied Britain, all without ever setting foot in the country. Pujol's greatest challenge, and his most brilliant improvisation, came when his German handler demanded intelligence on the departure of a major military convoy from Liverpool. The Abwehr had other sources confirming a large buildup of ships, and they needed Arabelle, their man on the ground, to provide the crucial details: the number of ships, their types, and their departure time. For a man sitting in a Lisbon apartment with nothing but a map, this was an impossible task. Panicked but resourceful, Pujol turned to his reference books. He knew Liverpool was a major port. He looked up shipping terminology and typical convoy compositions. Then, using a combination of public information from news reports about the war in North Africa and pure invention, he concocted a detailed report about a massive convoy preparing to leave. He listed destroyers, merchant vessels, and troop transports, inventing their numbers and armament. He timed his report to arrive in Madrid just after the real convoy had already set sail, making it seem like a genuine, albeit slightly delayed, piece of intelligence. The Germans were ecstatic. The convoy was real, and Arabelle's details were astonishingly close to the truth. His credibility soared, but his success immediately created a new, more dangerous problem. A message shot back from Madrid. Report arrives too late. Future reports must be sent before departure to be of use. Pujol was trapped. How could he report on a convoy's departure before it happened when he only learned about it from the news after it was already at sea? He couldn't admit he wasn't in Britain. He had to invent a reason for his failure, one that would not only excuse him but deepen the Germans' trust. He decided his fictional agent in Liverpool had to die. He wrote a heartbreaking letter back to his handler. He explained that his key agent in Liverpool, a sailor codenamed William, had suddenly fallen gravely ill just before the convoy's departure and had tragically died. To make the death utterly believable, Pujol even fabricated a short obituary from a local Liverpool newspaper and sent it along. But he didn't stop there. He informed Madrid that, as a loyal spy master, he had to travel to Liverpool immediately to support the agent's grieving widow and ensure her silence. He then submitted a detailed expense report for his fictional train journey, his hotel stay in Liverpool, and even a small sum for a bouquet of flowers for the widow. The Germans were not angry. They were profoundly moved. They sent their condolences for the loss of a brave agent and a bonus payment to help support the grieving family. Pujol had not only saved his operation, but had reinforced his image as a dedicated and compassionate leader of men. Meanwhile, British intelligence was in a state of utter confusion. Their code breakers at Bletchley Park, the top-secret facility that had cracked the Enigma code, were intercepting and decrypting the increasingly detailed reports from this mysterious German agent in London, Arabelle. The reports were a baffling mix of brilliant insight, verifiable facts, and bizarre inaccuracies. The agent seemed to be everywhere at once, reporting on troop movements in Scotland and naval convoys from Liverpool. Yet some of his information was demonstrably false, or based on outdated public knowledge. MI5, the British Security Service, was convinced a highly active, yet dangerously incompetent German spy ring was operating right under their noses. They launched a massive, frustrating manhunt. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. The mystery was finally solved in early 1942 through a bizarre coincidence. An American naval attaché in Lisbon, who had been approached by Pujol with another wild offer to spy, mentioned the eccentric Spaniard to his British counterparts. At the same time, a double agent working for the British in the German embassy in Madrid reported on the Abwehr's star agent in London, Arabelle. MI5 put the pieces together. The phantom intercepts from Arabelle, the strange Spaniard trying to contact them in both Madrid and Lisbon. It had to be the same person. They finally tracked Pujol down. The meeting took place in a nondescript office in Lisbon in April 1942. On one side of the table sat two bewildered MI5 officers. On the other sat Juan Pujol Garcia, a man they had been hunting for months, a man they believed to be the leader of a dangerous German spy ring in the heart of London. Pujol, finally having achieved his goal of an audience with British intelligence, laid out his entire incredible story. He explained that he had never been to Britain, that he had been operating from this very city, and that his entire network of agents was a complete and total fabrication. To prove it, he opened his ledger, showing them the detailed expense reports he had submitted to the Germans for the fictional travels of his fictional spies. He showed them his tourist guides and reference books, the raw materials of his grand deception. The MI5 officers were stunned into silence. They had been chasing a ghost, a phantom conjured from the mind of this strange, balding Spaniard. Their initial disbelief quickly morphed into a profound sense of awe. This wasn't an incompetent spy. This was arguably the greatest natural-born liar and actor they had ever encountered. This was not a threat to be neutralized, but a priceless asset to be weaponized. Within days, Pujol and his long-suffering wife, Araceli, were smuggled out of Portugal. They were flown to Britain in a clandestine operation. At last, Juan Pujol, the man who had written hundreds of thousands of words about life in wartime Britain, set foot in the country for the first time. The reality was a shock. It was colder, wetter, and the food was far worse than he had imagined. He was brought to a secure MI5 office in London and introduced to his new case officer, Thomas Harris. It was a partnership seemingly forged by fate. Harris was not a typical intelligence officer. He was a brilliant artist, a fluent Spanish speaker, and a man whose own creative mind could match Pujol's. He immediately understood and appreciated the sheer artistry of Pujol's deception. He saw Pujol not as a mere agent, but as a fellow creator. Together, the imaginative Spaniard and the meticulous British officer would refine their craft, transforming Pujol's solo performance into a full-scale theatrical production. Pujol was given a new code name, one that would become legendary in the annals of espionage: Garbo. His handler, Harris, chose the name because he believed Pujol was the greatest actor in the world. Now, with the full resources of the British government at his disposal, Garbo's phantom network grew exponentially. What was once a handful of agents born from a tourist guide became a sprawling, complex orchestra of 27 fictional characters. Harris and Pujol spent weeks fleshing out their creations. There was Agent Number 1, a Gibraltarian waiter working in a London club. Agent Number 3, a disgruntled Venezuelan student in Glasgow. Agent Number 4, the leader of the Welsh nationalist Aryan World Order. Agent Number 7, a secretary in a key government ministry. They wrote their life stories, created their psychological profiles, and filled out their official MI5 paperwork as if they were real agents. Their method of communication with the Germans was upgraded from invisible ink to regular typed letters and eventually direct radio transmissions. This gave Harris and Pujol complete control over the narrative. They could now conduct entire conversations in real time between Garbo's German handler and any one of his 27 phantom spies. The level of detail was breathtaking. They invented arguments between the agents, had them fall ill, go on vacation, or get into trouble with the law, all to make the network seem like a living, breathing, and fallible human organization. Garbo's mission was now the centerpiece of the double-cross system, a massive MI5 operation to control every single German agent in Britain and use them to feed a carefully curated stream of disinformation back to the German High Command. And Garbo was their undisputed star player. His network was so large, so varied, and so utterly trusted by the Germans that he became their primary and often sole source of intelligence from the British Isles. The stakes of Garbo's elaborate performance reached their absolute peak in the spring of 1944. The Allies were preparing for Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy, the largest amphibious assault in human history. They had amassed a staggering force of men, ships and aircraft. But all of it could be thrown back into the sea if they failed to achieve one crucial objective: surprise. The German 15th Army, a formidable force with multiple panzer divisions, was stationed at the Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel. If that army moved to reinforce the Normandy defenses in the first hours of the invasion, D-Day would become a bloodbath. To prevent this, Allied High Command devised the most ambitious and complex deception plan of the war: Operation Fortitude. Its goal was simple and audacious: to convince the Germans that the Normandy landings were merely a feint, a large-scale diversion designed to draw their reserves away from the real target. The main Allied invasion, they had to believe, would strike weeks later at the Pas-de-Calais. And the man tasked with selling this monumental lie directly to the German High Command was Agent Garbo. The entire southeast of England was transformed into a giant theatrical stage. The Allies created a completely fictional army, the first United States Army group, FUSAG. They built hundreds of inflatable rubber tanks and canvas aircraft, scattering them across the fields of Kent to be photographed by German reconnaissance planes. They hired radio operators to generate a constant stream of fake radio traffic, simulating the communications of a million-man army. They even produced fake wedding announcements in local papers for the non-existent soldiers of FUSAG. To make the Phantom Army utterly convincing, they assigned its command to the one general the Germans respected and feared above all others, the aggressive and unpredictable George S. Patton. But all of this was just elaborate stage dressing. It was Garbo's job to write the script and deliver the performance that would make it all believable. From his small, secure radio room in London, he and Thomas Harris began sending a flood of intelligence reports to his German handlers, a carefully orchestrated symphony of disinformation from his network of 27 phantom agents. His agent in Dover reported seeing General Patton personally overseeing the buildup of troops. His agent number 7, the secretary, passed on overheard whispers from the Ministry of War about the strategic importance of Calais. His KLM pilot reported a massive concentration of landing craft and bombers in the southeast. Every single piece of intelligence, hundreds of messages transmitted over several weeks, was meticulously crafted to reinforce one, and only one, conclusion. Normandy was a diversion. The real decisive attack was aimed at Calais. The deception was so elaborate that Garbo even had one of his fictional agents arrested. and sent a report detailing his capture, a move designed to add another layer of authenticity to the network. The Germans, completely invested in their star agent, swallowed every word. Their own intelligence reports, based on reconnaissance photos of the inflatable tanks and intercepts of the fake radio traffic, seemed to confirm everything Garbo was telling them. By May 1944, the German High Command was utterly convinced that the main Allied invasion would land at the Pas de Calais. Garbo's performance had set the stage for the final, decisive act of the war. He had built his army of ghosts, and now the entire German military was preparing to fight a phantom. On the 5th of June, 1944, the eve of the Normandy landings, Garbo sent his most critical message of the war. He contacted his German handlers via radio, warning them that a massive Allied operation was imminent. However, he masterfully framed the intelligence not as the main invasion, but as the large-scale diversion he had been predicting for months, designed to draw their reserves away from Calais. To ensure his message was taken with the utmost seriousness, he kept the radio operator on the line for over 2 hours, a testament to the urgency of his intelligence. Then, in the early hours of D-Day, as the first Allied ships approached the French coast, Garbo executed his boldest move. He went silent. His radio operator informed the Germans that Garbo's London home had been caught in an air raid and his equipment was temporarily out of action. This created a perfect excuse for his inability to provide instant updates on the landings, adding a layer of dramatic realism to his performance. Hours later, once the invasion was well underway, he came back on the air, frantic. He apologized profusely for his silence and sent a torrent of information about the Normandy landings. The details were all accurate: division numbers, landing sites, initial objectives, but they were deliberately timed to arrive just hours too late to be of any tactical use to the German defenders. This masterful stroke cemented his credibility beyond any doubt. He had proven he was right there, in the thick of the action, a reliable source frustrated only by the fortunes of war. As history now knows, the German High Command, from the generals on the ground to Hitler himself in his bunker, swallowed the lie whole. They held back their most powerful panzer divisions, keeping them stationed near Calais for weeks, waiting for Patton's Phantom Army to make the real attack. This critical hesitation gave the Allies the precious time they needed to overcome the bloody resistance on the beaches, establish a secure foothold, and begin the liberation of Europe. The deception had worked beyond anyone's wildest dreams. A single man's imagination had successfully paralyzed the most formidable army in the world at the most crucial moment in history. Even as the Allied forces pushed deeper into France from the Normandy beachheads, Garbo's mission was far from over. His greatest challenge now was to keep the lie alive. He and Thomas Harris continued their relentless campaign of disinformation, working around the clock to maintain the illusion that Normandy was a secondary front. Through his Phantom network, he sent reports detailing the heavy casualties and slow progress of the Allied forces, suggesting the operation was on the verge of failure. He insisted that the High Command was preparing to recommit to the real plan: the massive invasion at the Pas de Calais, led by General Patton. His reports were so convincing that he managed to keep the German 15th Army, with its 19 powerful divisions, pinned down and waiting for a ghost invasion for 2 crucial months after D-Day. Military historians now agree that this act of deception was as vital to the Allied success as any battle fought on the ground. By preventing those divisions from reinforcing the German lines in Normandy, Garbo saved countless Allied lives and dramatically shortened the war. The ultimate surreal confirmation of his success came on the 29th of July, 1944. A coded radio message arrived from his German handler in Madrid. It informed him that, for his invaluable service to the Third Reich, his brilliant intelligence work, and his unwavering loyalty, the Führer himself had personally authorized that he be awarded the Iron Cross. It was Germany's highest military honor, a medal reserved for acts of extreme bravery. The German High Command, still completely oblivious to the fact that their star agent was a fabrication, had decorated the very man who had engineered their catastrophic defeat. Pujol, upon learning the news, could only laugh at the profound absurdity of it all. He had sought to destroy the Nazi regime, and in the process had become one of its decorated heroes. A few months later, on the 25th of November, as the war in Europe was entering its final bloody stages, Juan Pujol Garcia was quietly escorted to a secret ceremony. There, in recognition of his role in saving D-Day, King George VI made him a member of the Order of the British Empire, MBE. In the secret, shadowy world of espionage, where allegiances are fluid and truth is a commodity, Juan Pujol Garcia had achieved the impossible. He remains one of the only people in history to have been highly decorated by both warring sides in the same conflict. He had played the game of deception so perfectly that he had been rewarded by both the tricksters and the tricked. After the war, Pujol's life was in grave danger. Though the Nazi regime had fallen, there were still die-hard sympathizers and former intelligence officers who might seek revenge on the man who had so thoroughly humiliated them. MI5 agreed. Together, they staged his final and most personal act of deception. They created a detailed cover story, informing their contacts that Juan Pujol had contracted malaria while on a mission in Angola and had tragically died in 1949. The official file was closed. The world, and what was left of the German intelligence community, was informed that Agent Garbo was dead. The world forgot about the greatest actor of the war. Pujol, with a new identity and a modest payment from the British government, moved his family to Venezuela. He attempted to start a new life, far from the world of shadows and lies. He opened a small bookshop and gift store and lived in quiet, unassuming anonymity for decades. He told no one, not his new friends, not even his own children, about his incredible past. The hero who had saved D-Day had become a ghost, his secret locked away. The truth remained buried for 35 years. It was presumed that Garbo was just another casualty of the war, his story a fascinating but closed chapter in the history of espionage. That is, until 1984. A British writer and member of Parliament named Nigel West, a specialist in intelligence history, was researching a book on wartime deception. Sifting through newly declassified MI5 files, he became obsessed with the story of Agent Garbo. The official account of his death in Africa seemed too neat, too convenient. He found inconsistencies, small details that didn't add up. He began to suspect that the greatest actor in the world might have staged one final brilliant performance. Driven by a historian's hunch, West embarked on a painstaking international search. He followed old leads, interviewed retired intelligence officers, and pored over records. The trail eventually led him to a small town in Venezuela and to a man who ran a gift shop. He approached the aging shopkeeper. "Are you Juan Pujol?" he asked. The ghost had been found. The world was stunned. The news of Garbo's survival was a global sensation. Pujol was brought back to London, where he was tearfully reunited with his old MI5 comrades in an emotional ceremony. But the most poignant moment was yet to come. On the 40th anniversary of D-Day, he traveled to the beaches of Normandy. He walked through the endless, immaculate rows of white crosses at the American cemetery at Colleville-sur-Mer. An old man, overwhelmed by the scale of the sacrifice, he wept for the thousands of lives his phantom army had helped to save. He was finally able to see, in stark and heartbreaking reality, the real-world consequences of his brilliant, imaginative lies. He had entered the war a nobody, a failed hotel manager with a crazy, impossible idea. He ended it as a hero who had quite literally fooled the devil himself and in doing so had helped to save the world.